On the evening of November 18th, 1978, Midtown Manhattan was already turning into a cold machine, steam lifting from subway grates, taxi tires hissing over wet asphalt, storefront neon bleeding into puddles like diluted warning lights. On West 37th Street, tucked between a print shop and a shuttered diner, Park & Son's Tailoring stayed open past its usual hour for one reason: a suit that had arrived in a garment bag with no return address, no brand tag, and a note that didn't sound like a customer. Need ready by Friday. No delays. Do not press the lining. Eddie Park read that line 3 times, then folded the paper along its creases as if the act of respecting the fold might keep the request ordinary. He was 32, a second-generation tailor who measured his life in half inches and clean seams. The kind of man who could spot a crooked collar from across the street and felt physical discomfort when a thread snagged. He didn't work for diplomats. He didn't work for Wall Street sharks. His clientele was mostly garment district regulars who wanted their shoulders softened and their cuffs perfect before a wedding or a court date. This suit was different the moment Eddie lifted it from the bag. The cloth looked like a conservative charcoal worsted, but it drank light in an unnatural way, too dense, too even, like the fabric had been chosen not for style, but for consistency. The jacket was heavy for its cut. The lining lay flatter than it should have, as if the inside of the garment had been trained. Eddie hung it on the rack beside the press and caught himself listening to the shop's silence, to the hum of the fluorescent tubes, to the faint tick of the old wall clock above the register. Outside, the street was noisy. Inside, the quiet felt staged. He set the suit on his work table under the bright task lamp and began the routine that never failed him. Inspect. Chalk. Measure. Pin. The waist needed a nip. The sleeves were a touch long. Standard work. Comforting work. Then his fingers found the first wrong thing. At the inside of the left cuff, beneath the lining where the hand would never naturally brush, there was a stitch pattern Eddie hadn't used in years. Double-locked. Micro-tight. Almost surgical. Not decorative. Not reinforcing. A stitch meant to hold something in place while pretending it was only thread. Eddie's thumbnail slid along the seam, and he felt a faint ridge between layers, something thin and stiff. No thicker than a matchbook cover, but longer. His pulse rose in a way that annoyed him. There were legitimate reasons for hidden inserts: shoulder pads, collar stays, an occasional tailoring trick to force a drape. This wasn't that. He reached for his seam ripper, paused, and looked again at the note. Do not press the lining. That wasn't a preference. It was a precaution. Eddie glanced toward the front window. The blinds were half drawn, but he could still see silhouettes passing in the reflected glass. Couples, commuters, a man stopping at the corner to light a cigarette. Ordinary, and yet Eddie felt, with no evidence he could explain, that if he cut the wrong thread in the wrong order, something outside that window would change. He told himself he was being dramatic. He told himself he was tired. Then he noticed something else. A faint dusting of tailor's chalk on the inside hem. One clean diagonal line. Too deliberate to be accidental. Eddie hadn't chalked that area yet. No one in his shop did diagonal marks like that. Someone had marked the suit before it ever reached his hands. Eddie's mouth went dry. He lowered his tools like a man setting down a weapon he hadn't meant to pick up. And for the first time in his life, he considered a thought that felt ridiculous in a room full of needles and thread. What if this garment wasn't meant to be worn? What if it was meant to be moved? Eddie didn't cut anything right away. He did what tailors do when they're scared without admitting it. He turned fear into procedure. He photographed the note on the counter with the shop Polaroid he used for before and after fittings. Not because he had a plan, but because something in him wanted a timestamp, a proof that this moment had existed before it evaporated. Then he locked the front door, flipped the open sign to closed, and killed the overhead fluorescents so only the work lamp burned above the table. A single cone of light that made the suit look less like clothing and more like evidence. He lifted the jacket again, slow, listening for a sound that wouldn't come. There was no electronics hum. No ticking, nothing dramatic, only cloth shifting against cloth. Eddie turned the cuff inside out and found the stitch line precisely. Too precise. Whoever had done it wasn't a tailor. They were someone imitating tailoring the way a safecracker imitates carpentry. Close enough for the untrained eye. Dead wrong to anyone who lived by the craft. He slid the seam ripper under the first thread and paused. If the warning about pressing the lining mattered, heat mattered. If heat mattered, whatever was inside might be film, adhesive, chemical coating, something that could smear, fusey, or self-destruct when warmed. Eddie's hands were steady now. Not calm, just committed. He cut a single stitch, then another, easing the seam open like he was diffusing a bomb made of silk. The lining separated with a soft sigh. Inside, nested between two layers of fabric, was a strip of translucent material no wider than a thumb and longer than Eddie's hand, flexible but not cloth, with a faint grid of tiny frames visible when he tilted it under the lamp. Microfilm? He'd seen it once in a magazine article about wartime espionage, a photo of a spy kit laid out like jewelry. He hadn't believed people still did that. Not in 1978. Not in a suit sleeve. He didn't touch the strip directly. He used the flat end of his shears to lift it. The way you lift something, you don't want your fingerprints on, even if you don't know why you don't want them there. Beneath the microfilm was a second layer, an inner pocket sewn so cleanly it might as well have been factory work. Eddie opened it, expecting nothing, hoping nothing, and found a folded rectangle of paper sealed in thin plastic. No letterhead, no signature, just numbers, arranged in tight blocks, like account ledgers without money. A one-time pad. Eddie didn't know the term, but he knew what it wasn't. It wasn't a shopping list. It wasn't a receipt. It was too neat, too sterile, too intentionally meaningless. He stood there with his shop quiet around him, the city pressing against the glass, and realized the real terror wasn't what he'd found. It was how comfortable the hiding place was. A suit meant to move through lobbies, taxis, restaurants, elevators. A suit meant to pass security with a smile and a handshake. A suit that could brush shoulders with senators and never be searched because people didn't search clothing. They searched people who looked like criminals. Someone had built a weapon out of respectability. Eddie slid the microfilm back into its pocket, not because he wanted to protect the spy, but because his instincts screamed that the worst thing he could do was make the suit obviously tampered with. If someone came for it, and now he was sure someone would, they'd know instantly that the lining had been opened. So he reseated the strip exactly where it had been, smoothed the fabric, and re-sewed 3 stitches with the same thread tension as the original, leaving the seam just barely intact. A false promise. Then he heard footsteps outside. Not fast, not lingering. Just a pause at the door, the faint jingle of someone testing the knob. Like they expected it to give. Eddie held his breath. The knob turned once, met the lock, stopped. A shadow crossed the frosted glass panel, and for a second Eddie saw the outline of a man's head, close enough that Eddie could imagine the shape of his nose, the brim of his hat, the patience in his posture. A moment later, the footsteps moved on. Eddie didn't exhale until he was sure the sound had blended into the street again. He looked down at the suit on his table, at the ordinary lapels and the conservative buttons, and he understood something with a clarity that made his stomach twist. This wasn't a secret being transported. It was a route, and he had just stepped onto it. Eddie waited a full minute after the footsteps faded, not because he believed in luck, but because he believed in patterns. Whoever tested the knob hadn't pounded, hadn't cursed, hadn't tried a shoulder. That meant discipline. Discipline meant more than one person. More than one person meant the street outside his shop, his ordinary block with its diner smell and bus exhaust, was suddenly a corridor in a system he couldn't see. He killed the work lamp, leaving the shop in the dim orange spill from the street lights, and moved to the front window without stepping into the display's open sightline. His mother had taught him that in Puerto Rico, if you want to look out without being seen, don't put your face in the glass. He lifted the edge of the curtain with 2 fingers. Across the street, a car sat at the curb with its lights off. Not parked like a neighbor, parked like a decision. The driver's silhouette was a darker shape inside darkness, motionless. The kind of stillness that only comes from practice or obsession. Eddie watched for a cigarette ember, a head turn, a door opening. Nothing. The car could have been empty, and that possibility somehow made it worse. He backed away and returned to the table, the suit lying there like an animal playing dead. His first thought was to call the police. Then the thought finished itself. And say what? That a man brought in a suit, and the suit had, what? A strip of tiny pictures, some numbers. A stranger tried his door. The part of his brain that liked clean logic offered him a brutal conclusion. No one would move fast for something that sounded like a story. But another conclusion formed beneath it. Maybe no one was supposed to move fast. Maybe the system that hid microfilm in clothing depended on hesitation, on civilians doubting their own senses until the moment passed. He reached into the suit pocket and pulled out the claim ticket again. The name was still there in the same ink. Still ordinary enough to lull you. Alan Kay. No last name. No phone number. No address. Eddie had been careless with that. 2. Accepting a suit without insisting on details because a man had looked like the kind of man who never had to prove anything. He opened the shop's ledger, flipped to the day, and found the line he'd written. Same abbreviation, Alan Kay. And beneath it, in his own handwriting, the note rush hem that meant nothing except it was a reason for the suit to exist in Eddie's hands. He ran a thumb along the paper and tried to steady his breathing. Then he noticed something he hadn't before. The pressure marks, the pen that wrote Alan Kay, had bitten deeper than the rest of the page, leaving faint indentations on the sheet beneath, like someone had written the name while thinking about something else. Pressing too hard, Eddie pulled the carbon paper out, held it up to the window's light, and tilted it until the ghost lines appeared. Not words, not sentences, a sequence of shallow impressions, numbers, written on the sheet beneath the claim ticket, and then erased from the top page with the casual confidence of someone who knew civilians didn't look for indentations. Eddie's stomach tightened. Whoever had dropped off the suit had used Eddie's counter as a writing surface. He hadn't just handed Eddie a package. He'd used him as part of the process. Eddie's eyes drifted to the back room, his tiny pressing area, his steam iron, the rack where finished garments hung like sleeping bodies. That's where the microfilm belonged in the normal world of his shop. Stitched, hidden, returned, gone. But now the route had hiccuped. Someone had left a warning in thread, and someone else had checked the door like they were making sure the route corrected itself. He made himself move. He took the suit and hung it on the far rack behind a row of winter coats, burying it in fabric like it was contagious. Then he walked to the phone and stopped with his hand hovering over the receiver. He didn't call the police. He called the only person he knew who worked around federal buildings, the kind of job that came with quiet rules. His older cousin, Lou Rivera, didn't wear a badge. He wore a navy blazer and carried keys that opened doors Eddie had never seen. He worked night maintenance at a government contractor complex outside the city. The kind of place with fences and guard shacks and men who didn't tell you what they did inside. The phone rang 3 times before Lou picked up, voice low, already wary. Eddie, you okay? Eddie stared at the dark shop as if it might answer for him. Lou, he said, keeping his own voice flat. I need you to listen. I found something in a suit. Something that doesn't belong in a suit. There was a pause on the line, small, but heavy, like a door shutting somewhere. Lou didn't ask what Eddie meant. He asked, Is anyone with you right now? Eddie's throat went dry. No, he said. Then, because he wasn't sure anymore, he added, I don't think so. Lou inhaled slowly, as if choosing every next word like a safe combination. Don't touch it again, Lou said. Don't press it. Don't cut anything else. And whatever you do, don't take it home. Eddie swallowed. What is it? Lou didn't answer the question. He asked another, one that chilled Eddie more than any siren could. Did the man who brought it in look like he belonged anywhere? Eddie hesitated, the receiver warm against his palm, and pictured the man again. Not his face exactly, but the way he'd occupied the doorway, as if the doorway belonged to him. He looked clean, Eddie said finally. Not rich, not poor. Like a man you'd forget the moment he left. Lou exhaled through his nose, a sound that wasn't disbelief so much as confirmation. That's the point, he said. Okay. Listen to me. I'm coming to you. Don't hang up until I tell you. Eddie stayed on the line, eyes on the front window, on the black car that still hadn't moved. His mind kept circling the same impossible thing. The suit wasn't just clothing anymore. It was a mailbox, a carrier pigeon, a weapon that didn't need a gun. Lou's voice tightened. If someone comes back, you do not open the door. If they knock, you let them knock. If they say a name, you tell them you're closed. Nothing else. You hear me? I hear you. You got a back exit. Alley door. Lock it. Then stand where you can see it without standing in front of it. Eddie obeyed, sliding the deadbolt, pulling a chair just enough to watch the narrow hallway that led to the alley. The shop felt different with every bolt turned, less like a business, more like a room you could be trapped in. There was a small clatter outside, metal on pavement. Eddie flinched, then realized it was only a bottle rolling in the gutter. The car across the street remained a matte shadow. When he looked again, he saw the faintest movement inside it, the glow of a dashboard light, then gone, as if someone had shielded it with a hand. Lou's voice dropped even lower. Eddie, I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you so you don't do the thing people do in movies. Don't be brave. Be boring. Boring keeps you alive. Eddie swallowed. What is this? Lou! It's a problem that belongs to people with different phones, Lou said. And you just touched it. The line clicked softly, Lou ending the call, then the dial tone, sudden and naked. Eddie set the receiver down like it could burn him. A minute passed. Then another. The clock over the register kept ticking, as if time hadn't changed shape. The black car finally moved, not driving away, not pulling up, just rolling forward half a length and stopping again. A reposition, a better angle. Eddie felt his pulse begin to thud in his throat. Then the front door handle turned once, slow and testing, and when it didn't give, whoever was outside didn't rattle it again. No frustration. No escalation, just a pause, as if a decision were being recorded somewhere. A slip of paper appeared under the door. It didn't flutter like an accident. It slid in flat. Controlled? Eddie stared at it for a long second before crouching low and pulling it toward him with the edge of a ruler, keeping his fingers off it the way Lou had said. Boring, careful, alive. The paper was plain, unlined, folded once, inside. 5 numbers were written in neat block script, and beneath them, a sentence so casual it almost read like a joke. Hem finished, same time, same place. Eddie's mouth went dry. That wasn't a threat. It was an instruction meant for someone who assumed Eddie would do exactly what he always did. Make the suit disappear back into the night without questions, without fingerprints, without witnesses. A car door closed somewhere nearby, soft as a whisper. And from the alley, behind the shop, Eddie heard the faintest sound of a latch being tried, once, then released, as if whoever was out there wanted him to know they could reach every door he had. Lou didn't come through the front. Eddie heard the alley door's deadbolt take a hard knock. Not a kick, not force, just a firm pressure that tested the hardware the way a locksmith tests a lock. Then 3 light taps followed, spaced like punctuation. Eddie stayed still, watching the thin slice of hallway, watching the shadow at the bottom of the door shift as if someone leaned in to listen for breathing. Eddie, Lou's voice, low, close to the wood. It's me. Open it, and don't stand in the doorway. Eddie unlatched the bolt and pulled the door inward just enough to see Lou's shoulder. Then Lou slipped inside and pulled it shut behind him with the kind of economy Eddie had never seen in a man who spent his nights gambling and complaining about parking tickets. Lou's coat was damp at the cuffs, and his eyes kept moving. Ceiling corner. Back room. The rack of suits, like the shop, had become a map he needed to memorize in seconds. You touched the note? Lou asked. With a ruler. Good. Lou took the paper from Eddie without looking at it long, then folded it along the same crease, tucking it into a plastic baggie he'd pulled from his pocket. Not evidence bag official, just household. But the instinct was the point. Whoever wrote that expects a handoff at your counter. They think you're part of the loop. "I'm not," Eddie said, and hated how defensive it sounded. Lou didn't comfort him. He just walked straight to the suite hanging on the back rack, the one Eddie had pulled apart and put back together with trembling fingers. He didn't touch it at first. He looked at it like it might look back. "You see any chalk outside?" Lou asked. Chalk. On the curb. On the brick. A stupid little mark nobody notices until they're trained to. Lou's gaze cut to the front window. They like to talk without talking. Eddie shook his head. Lou finally reached out, pinched the suit's lapel between two fingers, and turned it slightly toward the overhead light. "Where's the stitch?" Eddie pointed. "Inside seam. Under the arm." Lou nodded, then did something that made Eddie's stomach tighten. He took a small penlight out and ran it along the seam in a slow, deliberate pass, not searching for thread, searching for reflective film. When he found it, he didn't react the way Eddie expected. No gasp, no curse, just a faint narrowing of the eyes, as if the stitch had confirmed a theory he'd hoped was wrong. "This isn't hobbyist work," Lou said. "This is clean. Whoever sewed that knew what they were doing. Whoever wears it knows what it's for." A car horn sounded out front, one short beep, like a signal more than impatience. Lou froze mid-breath. Then, from the dining room-sized silence of the shop, Eddie heard it, the soft scrape of tires slowing on wet pavement. Lou lifted a hand. "Don't move." Footsteps approached the front door, not rushing, not sneaking, confident, measured, as if the man outside had done this enough times to be bored by it. The door handle turned once, gently. A voice came through the glass, calm and almost friendly. "Evening," it said. "I'm here for my suit." Lou didn't answer the voice at the glass. He moved like he'd decided something already, crossing behind the counter without letting his shoes click, pulling Eddie down with him until they were both crouched in the shadowed pocket beneath the register. From there, Eddie could see the front door's frosted panel, the blurred outline of a man standing close enough that his breath might fog the edge of it. The handle turned again, still gentle. "A test, Mr. Russo," the man called, using Eddie's last name like they were old friends. "I know you're in there." Eddie's mouth went dry. Lou leaned in until his lips were at Eddie's ear. "They don't knock like debt collectors," Lou whispered. "They knock like they already own the room." Outside, the man tapped twice on the glass, 2 quick beats. Then a pause. Then one more. Eddie didn't know why it mattered, but Lou's eyes flickered, tracking the rhythm like he was reading it. Lou slid open the drawer beneath the counter and pulled out Eddie's long metal yardstick, the same one Eddie used to measure inseams. He held it in his hand as if it were a weapon, which was ridiculous and also, in that moment, the only thing that made Eddie feel less helpless. The bell over the front door didn't ring. The door hadn't opened, but the man's silhouette shifted, as if he'd stepped slightly to one side. Then the phone rang in the back room. One ring. Only one. Eddie flinched. Lou didn't. He went completely still, eyes locked on the doorway to the back. "That's not your line," Lou murmured. "That's a trigger." The ring cut off, replaced by a thin, dead silence that made Eddie's skin crawl. Somewhere outside, an engine idled too smoothly. Lou lifted 2 fingers, counting in his head, seconds, not numbers, and Eddie realized he wasn't waiting for the caller to try again. He was waiting for the move that followed. At the front, the man spoke again, voice unchanged. "I'll come back later." The silhouette withdrew. Eddie heard footsteps recede. No hurry, no anger. The street noise returned in a slow wash, like someone had turned the world back on. Lou didn't stand up right away. He stayed crouched, listening. When he finally rose, he did it carefully, as if the air itself could snap. He crossed to the backroom phone and lifted the receiver without letting it click against the cradle. He listened for less than 2 seconds, then hung it up the same way. "Line's clean," Eddie said, because he needed to say something. Lou looked at him. Clean is what they want you to think. He went to the suit rack, grabbed the compromised suit by the hanger, and shoved it into a garment bag. Then he took Eddie by the elbow and steered him toward the back door. "We're not staying," Lou said. Eddie balked. "If I leave, he'll know?" "He already knows." Lou cut in. His voice softened just a fraction. "The only question is whether we let him choose the next room." As they slipped into the alley, the street light buzzed overhead, and Eddie caught a glimpse of a car parked half a block down, headlights off, windshield dark, someone inside sitting very still, watching the shop as if it were a target and a confession at the same time. Lou didn't walk straight down the alley. He cut left, then right, forcing the watcher to choose a turn before he ever offered his back. Eddie kept the garment bag pinned to his chest like it could stop a bullet, his breath coming out in hard white bursts that vanished under the street lamp's hum. "Don't look over your shoulder," Lou said, not unkindly. "If they're there, they want your eyes." Eddie hated that he listened. They emerged onto the next block where the traffic was thicker and the noise had edges, buses sighing at the curb, a delivery truck clattering over a pothole, two teenagers laughing too loudly for no reason. Lou steered him into a hotel lobby like he'd been there 100 times, past the revolving door, past the brass railings and the fake greenery that made everything feel safe on purpose. At the payphone near the restrooms, Lou didn't dial right away. He watched the glass doors. He watched the bellhop stand. He watched the mirror behind the bar that showed the street without looking at it directly. Then he fed a coin into the slot and dialed a number Eddie didn't recognize. 7 digits. No hesitation. When someone answered, Lou didn't say who he was. "Lou Kessler," he said instead, like a password. "I have something sewn into a suit that was never meant to be found. If you're still you, you'll ask me what color the lining is." A pause. Lou's jaw tightened. "Charcoal," he said. "And the stitch is wrong." He listened for 5 seconds, then hung up. "Who was that?" Eddie whispered. "A man who knows how to lose a conversation," Lou said. "Sit, smile, act like you're waiting for your wife to finish shopping." Eddie sat on the lobby couch with the garment bag at his feet, trying to look harmless while his heart tried to crawl out of his ribs. Through the revolving door, he saw the same dark car glide past the curb once, then again, slower the second time, like it was measuring the lobby windows. 10 minutes later, 2 men walked in, no coats that matched, no synchronized steps, no hard eyes. They looked like they could be insurance adjusters, which was the point. One of them drifted toward the front desk, as if to ask for a room. The other stopped at Eddie's couch and didn't look at Eddie at all. "Mr. Russo?" he said quietly. Eddie's throat locked. Lou answered for him. "He's with me," Lou said. "And you're late." The man's gaze flicked once to the garment bag, then away. "We need to see the suit." Lou lifted the bag, but he didn't hand it over. "Not here." The man nodded like he understood the rules of that sentence. "Then we walk?" They didn't leave through the front. They didn't rush. They crossed the lobby like 4 strangers who'd never met, spaced apart, reflections sliding over polished marble. And when they passed the revolving door, Eddie caught, for half a second, the dark car across the street idling with its lights off, then pulling away as if it had decided the night wasn't worth the risk. In a service corridor behind the hotel kitchen, under fluorescent light that made everyone look guilty, the man finally opened the garment bag. Lou held the suit steady while the other one took a small blade and lifted the seam Eddie had found, careful as a surgeon, exposing the thin, slick strip hidden inside like a second spine. The first man didn't say KGB. He didn't say microfilm. He didn't say spy. He just exhaled once, like someone who'd been waiting years for a mistake. "This clean." "You did the right thing," he said. Lou's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. "I did what tailors do," he murmured. "I noticed what didn't belong." Later, hours later, maybe days, Eddie could never quite pin it down. Eddie would return to his shop and find the window intact, the lock unforced, the world pretending nothing had happened. On the counter, beneath the lamp, sat a plain envelope with no return address and no note inside. only Eddie's yardstick, laid perfectly straight, as if someone had taken it and brought it back to remind him that he'd been measured and spared, and that the line between those two outcomes was thinner than thread.